I was standing in my former childhood bedroom, watching my sister Vivian pack the last of my belongings into cheap cardboard boxes, when I realized with cold certainty that this was the exact moment, down to the minute, when my old life had ended. You know, Ling Ling, the countryside will be good for you, Vivian said, her voice dripping with false sympathy as she carelessly tossed my books into a box. You were never cut out for the city anyway. Too simple. I stood silent by the window, my hand resting on the faded curtain, watching her with the kind of calm that comes only from having died once already. In my previous life, I had cried during the scene. I had begged. I had thrown myself at our parents' feet and pleaded not to be sent away. It hadn't mattered. They had shipped me off to Qinghe Village, a poverty-stricken farming community 8 hours from the capital. Also, Vivian could have my university acceptance letter, my room, and my future. The party needs educated youth in the rural areas. My mother's voice echoed from downstairs, rehearsing the speech she would give to relatives. Ling Ling volunteered. She's always been so selfless. Selfless. The word tasted like poison. In my first life, I had believed them when they said it was temporary. I had trusted when they promised I could come back after a year. I had been naive enough to think that family meant something. I had spent 15 years in that village, 15 years of backbreaking labor, of being passed over for every opportunity, of watching my talents wither while Vivian built an empire on the foundation of my stolen dreams. And when I had finally returned to the city, broken and sick, seeking help, they had turned me away at the door. Vivian had become a famous tech entrepreneur by then, using the algorithm I had designed in high school, the one I'd foolishly shared with her. My parents had become her dependents, living in her luxury penthouse, bragging to friends about their successful daughter. I had died alone in a charity hospital, holding a newspaper with Vivian's face on the cover. Tech genius revolutionizes industry, the headline had proclaimed. My algorithm, my code, my life. But death, it turned out, wasn't the end. I had woken up in the same bedroom, in the same body, on my 18th birthday, 3 days before the volunteer papers would be signed. 3 days before my life was supposed to end. Only this time, I remembered everything. Ling Ling, are you even listening? Vivian snapped her fingers in front of my face. She was 22, beautiful in that calculated way she had perfected. Sharp cheekbones, designer clothes that our parents bought while I wore hand-me-downs, an air of superiority that came from being the favorite since birth. I'm listening, I said quietly. You are saying the countryside will be good for me. She smiled, the expression never reaching her eyes. Exactly, and besides, someone needs to go, the quota. For our district is one educated youth, better you than me, right? I have that interview at Chen Tech Industries next week. This could be my big break. Your big break, I thought, built on my stolen work. In my previous life, I hadn't known about the interview. I hadn't known that Vivian had already plagiarized my algorithm project, the one I'd been working on for 3 years, the one that could revolutionize data processing. I hadn't known she'd submitted it to the Chen Tech competition under her name. I hadn't known that my parents had found my research notes and quietly passed them to her, believing she could make better use of them. But I knew now. Of course, I said, turning from the window. Someone has to go. Vivian's smile widened with relief. She had expected more resistance. In the original timeline, I had fought for hours before collapsing in tears. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. Mother was worried you'd make a scene. No scene, I assured her. I'll sign the papers tomorrow. Her eyebrows rose in surprise, but she quickly masked it with a condescending pat on my shoulder. That's my little sister. Always so understanding. You know, when you're settled in the countryside, I'll visit. Bring you gifts from the city. She never had. Not once in 15 years. I smiled back at her, a smile she couldn't read. I'll look forward to it. That night I lay in bed and let the memories of my first life wash over me. Not to torment myself. I had done enough of that in the 3 days since my rebirth, but to catalog every detail, every mistake, every moment that had led to my destruction. My family had never loved me. That was the brutal truth I had refused to accept until death forced clarity upon me. I was the second daughter in a family that valued only success and status. Vivian, 4 years older, had always been the golden child, prettier, more charming, more ambitious. Or so everyone said. In reality, she was simply more ruthless. She had learned early how to manipulate our parents, how to position herself as the heir to their modest but comfortable fortune, how to ensure that every opportunity flowed to her while I received only scraps. Our father, Lin Zhengwei, was a mid-level government bureaucrat who had spent his entire career trying and failing to climb higher. He had pinned all his hopes on Vivian, believing she would succeed where he had not. Our mother, Wang Suyin, came from a once wealthy family that had fallen on hard times. She was obsessed with reclaiming lost status through her daughters, or rather, through Vivian. I was an afterthought, a backup plan, a resource to be exploited when useful and discarded when not. I had been a brilliant student, top of my class in mathematics and computer science, winner of multiple academic competitions, recipient of a full scholarship to Capital University, but none of it mattered. Because Vivian had failed her entrance exams, the solution in our parents' minds was simple. I would give up my spot for her. Not officially, of course, that would be too obvious. No, I would volunteer to go to the countryside for re-education, leaving my acceptance letter behind. Vivian would use my credentials, my test scores, my identity to enroll. She would become me, and I would cease to exist. In my first life, I hadn't understood the full scope of their plan until it was too late. I had thought they were just asking me to defer my enrollment, to let Vivian borrow my acceptance for 1 year while I did rural service. I had been stupid enough to believe them, but this time, I saw everything clearly. I had already found the forged documents in Father's study, papers that would legally change certain records, making it appear that Vivian had earned my test scores. I had overheard Mother on the phone with a university administrator who owed her a favor, arranging for the substitution. I had watched Vivian practice copying my handwriting, my signature, my mannerisms. They were stealing my entire existence, and I was going to let them. Because I had learned something in those 15 years of suffering in Qinghe village, something that death had crystallized into diamond-hard certainty. Revenge is a dish best served cold, and power, real power, doesn't come from being in the capital, attending the right university, or working in some prestigious company. Power comes from being underestimated, from being dismissed, from having everyone look away while you build your empire in the shadows. Qinghe village had been my prison in my first life. In this life, it would be my kingdom. I knew things now that I hadn't known before. I knew that Qinghe village sat on an undiscovered deposit of rare earth minerals that would be found 7 years from now, transforming it from a backwater into a boomtown. I knew which agricultural techniques would fail and which would succeed in that particular climate and soil. I knew which of the villagers were genuinely good people and which were petty tyrants. I knew that the village's location, currently considered a disadvantage, would become strategically valuable when the new high-speed rail line was approved in 5 years. Most importantly, I knew that the party secretary of Qinghe village, a man named Zhou Wei, would die of a heart attack in 3 months, leaving the position vacant. In my previous life, a corrupt official from the county had installed his nephew in the role, leading to years of embezzlement and abuse. But what if someone else took the position? Someone educated, someone with vision, someone who knew exactly how to transform a dying village into a thriving economic center. Someone like me. I had 15 years of memories to draw on, 15 years of learning the village's social dynamics, its politics, its secrets. I knew who to befriend and who to avoid. I knew which crops would fail and which would flourish. I knew exactly when to buy land and when to sell it. I knew how to play the long game. Let Vivian have the city, let her have the university, the career, the spotlight. She would shine brightly and briefly like a firework, and then, when her stolen success inevitably collapsed because she was using my work without understanding it, because she lacked the true genius to sustain it, she would have nowhere to fall but down. Meanwhile, I would build something real, something that couldn't be stolen or plagiarized, something that was mine and mine alone. And when I stood at the summit of my power, when I had transformed Qinghe from a footnote into a showcase, when my name was spoken with respect and admiration throughout the province, I would deny them what they wanted most: my forgiveness, my presence, my acknowledgement that they existed at all. They wanted to erase me? Fine, I would erase them. The next morning, I signed the papers without protest. much to my parents' poorly concealed relief. Father barely looked at me as he co-signed the forms, already mentally spending the money he would save by having only one daughter to support. Mother busied herself with making Vivian's favorite breakfast, chattering about how proud she was that her eldest was going to Chen Tech Industries. "You understand this is for the best, don't you, Ling Ling?" Father said gruffly, the closest he would come to expressing guilt. "Your sister has real potential. She could make something of this family." "I understand," I said, and I did. I understood that he had always seen me as expendable. I understood that Mother had probably celebrated when I was born a girl, ensuring I could never threaten Father's patriarchal expectations. I understood that Vivian had been shaped by their favoritism into something cruel and hollow. I understood everything, and I would forget nothing. "You'll write, won't you?" Mother asked, with an attempt at maternal concern that fooled no one. "Let us know how you're settling in." "Of course," I lied. I had no intention of writing. In my first life, I had sent letters every week for the first year, each one going unanswered. This time, I wouldn't waste the stamps. Vivian breezed into the kitchen, already dressed in the expensive clothes she had bought with money that should have been split between us. "Oh, good, you signed. I was worried you'd back out at the last minute." She grabbed a pastry from the table. "You know, Ling Ling, maybe this is for the best. You were never really city material anyway. You'll probably be happier in the countryside with simple people and simple work. No pressure to be something you're not." The condescension dripped from every word. In my first life, those words had cut deep, had made me question my own worth. Now they just made me smile. "You're probably right," I said mildly. "I'm sure I'll find my place there." She looked at me strangely for a moment, as if trying to detect sarcasm, but ultimately decided I was simply being my usual passive self. "Well, good. I'm glad we're all on the same page." She turned to Mother. "Did you get those notebooks from Ling Ling's desk? The ones with her research notes?" My hand tightened on my chopsticks, but I kept my expression neutral. Here it was, the proof of their conspiracy, spoken aloud in casual confidence because they thought I was beaten. "Yes, darling," Mother said. "They're in your room, though I must say some of that computer science material is quite advanced. Are you sure you can present it convincingly?" "Please," Vivian scoffed. "I've been watching her work on it for years. I understand it perfectly. Besides, those Chen Tech judges won't know the difference. They'll be so impressed by a young woman creating such an innovative algorithm, they'll offer me a position on the spot." Father nodded approvingly. "That's my girl, confident. That's what Ling Ling always lacked, confidence. Intelligence means nothing without the ability to sell yourself." They continued talking about the interview, about Vivian's bright future, about how the Chen family was connected to half the tech industry in China. I ate my breakfast in silence, memorizing every word, every dismissal, every casual cruelty. Let them talk, let them plan, let them believe they had won. The bus to Qinghe Village left in 3 hours. The journey to Qinghe Village was exactly as I remembered it. 8 hours of increasingly rough roads passing through 5 different counties, each one poorer than the last. The bus was crowded with farmers, traveling merchants, and a few other educated youth being sent to various rural posts. Most of them looked miserable, tearful, clutching bags of gifts from family members who actually cared about their welfare. I had one small suitcase and a backpack. That was all my parents had deemed necessary for my temporary assignment. I stared out the window and planned. First priority, establish credibility. I needed the villagers to see me not as a spoiled city girl, but as someone genuinely committed to helping them. In my first life, I had made the mistake of being openly unhappy, of complaining about the conditions, of making it clear I felt above rural work. It had taken years to overcome that initial impression. This time, I would be different from the start, humble but competent, willing to learn but also to teach, someone who respected their way of life while bringing new ideas. Second priority, identify allies. I knew from experience that Village Chief Chen Aiguo was a good man, honest but limited in vision. His daughter, Chen Xiaowen, would become my closest friend in my previous life, the only person who had shown me genuine kindness. I would cultivate that friendship earlier this time, and I would help her family in ways I hadn't been able to before. Third priority, position myself for Zhou Wei's position. The party secretary role wasn't typically given to outsiders, especially not to young women, but I had advantages. I was educated, I was from the city, which carried weight even in rural areas, and I was a party member, something I had become in high school, seeing it as a mere resume padding at the time. More importantly, I knew that the county officials would be desperate to find someone legitimate after Zhou Wei's death, someone who could prevent the village from falling into chaos. If I had already proven myself valuable to Qinghe, if I had the support of the village leaders, if I could demonstrate real results. Fourth priority, build economic independence. I had saved 800 yuan from tutoring jobs in the year before my volunteer assignment, money my parents didn't know about. In 1995, 800 yuan was a significant sum, especially in rural areas. I knew which crops would command high prices, which small businesses would succeed, which pieces of land were undervalued. I would invest carefully and build a financial foundation that couldn't be touched by my family. Fifth priority, prepare for the future. I had a notebook in my bag, a notebook my family didn't know existed, filled with everything I could remember about technological developments, economic trends, and political shifts over the next 15 years. I couldn't use most of this information directly without raising suspicion, but I could position myself to benefit when opportunities arose. The bus hit a pothole, jarring me from my thoughts. We were entering Qinghe County now, another hour to the village. I closed my eyes and allowed myself one moment of grief, not for the life I was leaving, but for the girl I had been in my first life. The one who had believed in family loyalty, who had thought love and sacrifice would be rewarded, who had trusted that doing the right thing would lead to good outcomes. That girl was dead. She had died in a hospital bed, betrayed and alone. I was someone else now, someone harder, someone smarter, someone who would win. Qinghe Village was exactly as I remembered it. A collection of about 300 households scattered across a valley with rice paddies stretching in every direction and mountains rising in the distance. The village center consisted of a small market square, a school, a clinic, and the Communist Party office. Most homes were simple brick structures, though a few wealthier families had two-story houses. It was poor, not desperately so. People had enough to eat, most children attended school, but there was no prosperity, no hope of advancement, no sense that life would ever be anything but an endless cycle of planting and harvesting. In my first life, I had found it suffocating. Now I saw opportunity. Village Chief Chen met me at the bus stop, a short, weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and a cautious manner. "You must be Lin Lingling," he said, looking at the paperwork I handed him. "From the capital? Here to teach at the school?" "That's correct, Uncle Chen," I said, using this respectful form of address that would immediately establish me as someone who understood rural customs. "Thank you for welcoming me." He looked surprised by my politeness. Most educated youth arrived with visible disdain. "Well, we're glad to have you. Lord knows the children could use a teacher who actually understands mathematics. Our current teacher, Teacher Wang, is doing his best, but..." He trailed off diplomatically. I knew what he wasn't saying. Teacher Wang was 70 years old, had only a middle school education himself, and was going blind. The children were learning almost nothing. "I'm honored to serve," I said. "I hope I can be useful to the village." Chen Aiguo studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Come, I'll show you to your quarters. It's not much." "I'm sure it will be fine," I interrupted gently. "I'm not here for comfort. I'm here to help." A slow smile spread across his face. "Well then, I think you'll do just fine here, Teacher Lin." My quarters were a small room in a house shared by 3 elderly villagers who had no families of their own. In my first life, I had been miserable in this room. It was cold in winter, hot in summer, and the walls were thin. This time, I thanked my hosts profusely, admired their vegetable garden, and won them over within an hour by helping to repair their leaking roof. By nightfall, word had spread through the village. The new educated youth wasn't like the others. She was polite, hardworking, respectful. It was a good start. I spent my first week in Qinghe learning the landscape all over again, but through different eyes. In my previous life, I had been so consumed by self-pity that I'd barely noticed the village's potential. Now I saw it everywhere. The rice paddies could produce twice their current yield with better irrigation. The village had a small tea plantation that was being mismanaged. I knew those tea plants would become valuable in 5 years when organic Chinese tea became fashionable internationally. There was a hillside that no one used because the soil was poor, but I remembered that hillside becoming the site of a successful apple orchard once someone imported the right tree species. Most importantly, there was land, cheap land. Land that would multiply in value when the rail line came through, when the minerals were discovered, when Qinghe transformed from a backwater into a destination. I began teaching immediately. The village school had 40 students ranging from 6 to 14 years old, all crammed into one room with broken desks and torn textbooks. In my first life, I had been overwhelmed and underprepared. This time, I knew exactly how to reach them. I made mathematics relevant by teaching through farming, calculating yields, measuring fields, understanding loans and interest. I taught literacy through local stories and practical applications. I brought energy and excitement to learning. Within 2 weeks, attendance had increased from 60% to 90%. Parents who had kept their children home to work in the fields began seeing value in education. "You have a gift," Chen Aiguo told me at the end of my 3rd week. "The children actually want to come to school now." "Education is power," I said simply. "These children deserve the same opportunities as city children." He looked at me thoughtfully. "You're not like I expected. Most educated youth from the city count the days until they can leave." I met his eyes. "I'm not planning to leave, Uncle Chen." His eyebrows rose. "Not planning, but surely after a year or two..." "Qinghe has potential," I said. "This village could be so much more than it is. I'd like to help make that happen, if you'll let me." It was a bold statement for a 19-year-old city girl who had been in the village less than a month, but I said it with such conviction that he couldn't dismiss it. "Well, he said slowly, "I'll be interested to see what you have in mind." I smiled. "So will I, Uncle Chen, so will I." That night, I wrote my first letter. Not to my family, they would never hear from me again, but to an address I had memorized in my previous life. An address in Shanghai belonging to a man I had never met but whose existence had haunted my first death. My grandfather, my mother's father, had been cut off from the family before I was born. Some scandal involving business dealings, or so I had been told. In my first life, dying in that hospital, I had seen a newspaper article about his death. It mentioned that he had tried to locate his grandchildren for years but had been blocked by his daughter. It mentioned he had died alone, wealthy but without family. I had cried then, realizing too late that I might have had an ally, someone who could have helped me if only I had known. This time I knew, and I was going to find him before it was too late. I kept the letter simple. Honorable Grandfather Wang, you do not know me, but I'm your granddaughter, Lin Lingling, daughter of Wang Suyin. I understand there has been estrangement between you and my mother. I do not know the full story, and I do not judge. I write only to tell you that I exist, that I think of you, and that if you ever wish to know your granddaughter, I am in Qinghe Village, Qinghe County, teaching at the village school. I ask nothing from you. I simply wanted you to know that not all of your family has forgotten you. With respect, Lin Ling Ling." I didn't know if he would respond. I didn't know if the address was still correct, but I had to try. Because while I could build power through my own efforts, having a wealthy, influential grandfather would accelerate everything. I mailed the letter the next day and tried not to hope too much. Weeks turned into months. I threw myself into village life with an intensity that surprised even me. I helped Chen Aiguo's wife, Aunt Liu, reorganize the village cooperative, introducing simple accounting methods that revealed they were being cheated by their middlemen. I taught a night class for adults focusing on practical literacy and basic mathematics. I helped 3 families repair their irrigation systems using techniques I'd learned in my first life. And I waited. Party Secretary Zhou Wei was still alive, still going about his duties with the slow decline of a man whose heart was failing. I watched him carefully, learning everything I could about how the village was governed, how decisions were made, how power flowed. I also made friends. Chen Xiaowen, the village chief's daughter, was exactly as I remembered her. Bright, kind, frustrated by the limitations of village life. In my first life, we hadn't become close until years later. This time, I sought her out immediately. You're different from the other educated youth we've had, she told me one evening as we walked through the fields. They all act like they're doing us a favor by being here. You actually seem to care. I do care, I said honestly. This village has so much potential, Xiaowen. So much that people can't see because they're too close to it. What do you see? She asked, genuinely curious. I hesitated. I couldn't reveal too much. Couldn't explain that I knew about the minerals, the rail line, the future boom. But I could share some of my vision. I see land that's underutilized, I said. I see crops that could be more profitable. I see children who are as smart as any city children but lack resources. I see a community that's isolated but could be connected. This village could be prosperous, Xiaowen. It could be a place people want to come to, not escape from. She looked at me with something like wonder. You really believe that? I know it, I said, and I'm going to prove it. She smiled. Then I'll help you, whatever you need. It was the beginning of a partnership that would change both our lives. 3 months after my arrival, two things happened almost simultaneously. First, I received a letter from Shanghai. My dear granddaughter, your letter reached me and moved me to tears. I have thought of you and your sister every day since I was forced from your mother's life. She made her choice, and I have respected it, painful as it has been. But you reached out to me, and that takes courage. I would very much like to know you. I am an old man now with more money than I can spend and no one to leave it to. If you will allow it, I would like to visit you in Qinghe village to see the granddaughter I never knew I had. I ask only one thing. Please do not tell your mother or sister about our correspondence. I do not wish to cause you problems with your family. Your grandfather, Wang Zhen. I read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking. He had responded. He wanted to meet me. And he had specifically mentioned not telling my mother or Vivian, which meant he understood, on some level, what they were like. This changed everything. The second thing that happened was that Party Secretary Zhou Wei collapsed in the village square and died before the doctor could reach him. The village went into mourning. Zhou Wei had been a fixture of Qinghe for 20 years, not a brilliant leader, but an honest one. His death left a vacuum, and I intended to fill it. The meeting to select a new party secretary took place a week after Zhou Wei's funeral. It was held in the village administrative building, a drafty structure with a leaking roof and windows that didn't quite close. Present were Chen Aiguo, the other village leaders, and 3 officials from the county party office. In my first life, this meeting had been a formality. The county officials had already decided to install Zhang Kun, a corrupt bureaucrat's nephew, in the position. The village leaders had protested weekly but ultimately acquiesced. Zhang Kun had then spent 7 years embezzling village funds and blocking any meaningful development. This time, things would be different. I had spent the week since Zhou Wei's death carefully laying groundwork. I had met with each village elder individually, sharing my vision for Qinghe's future. I had prepared a detailed proposal for agricultural improvements, infrastructure development, and educational expansion. I had secured letters of support from parents whose children I taught, from families I had helped, from Chen Xiaowen and her father. Most importantly, I had reached out to one of the county officials, Vice Secretary Wu, a woman I remembered as being fundamentally honest but politically cautious. In my first life, she had opposed Zhang Kun's appointment but had been overruled. This time, I had contacted her beforehand, requesting a meeting. Teacher Lin, she had said when we met in the county office 2 days ago, I've heard interesting things about you. You're the educated youth from the capital who actually wants to stay in Qinghe. I see Qinghe's potential, I had said, and I believe I can help realize it, but the village needs leadership that's committed to genuine development, not to enriching themselves or advancing their own careers. She had studied me carefully. You're very young and very direct. I'm educated, I'm a party member, and I'm already making a difference in the village, I said. The children's test scores have improved by 40% in 3 months. I've helped reorganize the cooperative, saving them thousands of yuan. I've taught adult literacy classes that now have 50 participants. I've lived in Qinghe for 3 months, but I understand its needs better than any outsider you might send in. And you want the party secretary position. I want what's best for Qinghe, I said. If that means supporting someone else who truly cares about the village, fine. But if it means supporting Zhang Kun, I let the name hang in the air. I know he's being considered. I know whose nephew he is. And I know exactly what kind of leader he'll be, Vice Secretary Wu's expression had sharpened. You know a lot for someone so young. I pay attention, I said simply. And I care about outcomes. Zhang Kun cares about money. There's a difference. She had nodded slowly. Come to the selection meeting, she had said. Present your case. I can't promise anything, but I'll listen. Now sitting in that drafty administrative building, I watched Zhang Kun arrive with the confidence of someone who believed the position was already his. He was in his 30s, well-dressed by rural standards, with the lazy arrogance of someone who had never had to work for anything. Chen Aiguo called the meeting to order. We're here to select a new party secretary for Qinghe Village, he said. Secretary Zhou served with honor for 20 years. His successor will have big shoes to fill. One of the county officials, Secretary Chen, no relation to Aiguo, cleared his throat. The county has a recommendation. Zhang Kun has experience in rural administration. I would like to present an alternative, I said, standing up. The room went silent. Zhang Kun looked at me with irritation, clearly wondering who this girl thought she was. Teacher Lin, Secretary Chen said, frowning. This is a meeting for party leaders and county officials, not for— I am a party member and a resident of Qinghe, I said calmly. I have the right to speak. I looked at Vice Secretary Wu, who nodded slightly. Let her speak, Wu said. I took a breath and began. 3 months ago, I came to Qinghe Village. In that time, I've had the privilege of getting to know this community, its strengths, its challenges, and its enormous untapped potential. I've taught your children and seen their hunger for knowledge. I've worked with your farmers and seen their dedication. I've lived among you and come to love this place. I pulled out the folder I had prepared. I've also created a 5-year development plan for Qinghe. It includes agricultural reforms that could increase village income by 50%, infrastructure improvements that would make the village more accessible, and educational programs that would give our children opportunities equal to those in the city. I've costed everything out, identified funding sources, and created an implementation timeline. I passed copies around the table. Zhang Kun didn't even glance at his. The county officials began reading with interest. I'm 19 years old, I continued. I know that's young for a party secretary, but I'm educated, I'm committed, and I'm already delivering results. More importantly, I have no ulterior motives. I'm not here to enrich myself or to use Qinghe as a stepping stone to a better position. This is where I want to be. This is where I can make a difference. This is absurd, Zhang Kun interrupted. The county has already decided. The county is listening, Vice Secretary Wu cut him off. Teacher Lin, your proposal is impressive, but a party secretary needs more than plans. They need political experience, connections, the ability to navigate bureaucracy. I can learn, I said. And with respect, Vice Secretary, what Qinghe needs right now isn't someone who knows how to navigate bureaucracy. It needs someone who cares about results, someone who will fight for this village rather than just manage it. Chen Aiguo stood. If I may speak, Teacher Lin has proven herself in 3 months more than some leaders prove themselves in years. My daughter's reading level has improved 2 grades. 3 families that were struggling are now stable because she helped them reorganize their finances. She fixed our irrigation system, for heaven's sake. She doesn't just talk about helping, she does it. Other village leaders began to speak up, sharing similar stories. The tide in the room was shifting. Secretary Chen looked uncomfortable. These are all admirable accomplishments, but party secretary is a position that requires maturity, experience, political connections, I said. Let me ask you something. What will Zhang Kun do for Qinghe? What's his vision? What has he accomplished? Zhang Kun's face reddened. I have extensive experience in what? In being your uncle's nephew? I let that land. Forgive my bluntness, but everyone in this room knows why you're being considered. It's not because of your abilities, it's because of your connections. And that's exactly what Qinghe doesn't need. This is outrageous, Zhang Kun sputtered. You can't speak to me like I can speak truthfully, I said. That's what leaders should do. Vice Secretary Wu was smiling now, a small, satisfied smile. Tell me, Teacher Lin, what makes you think you can handle the political pressures of this position? The compromises, the negotiations, the bureaucratic requirements? I don't believe in compromising when it comes to the welfare of the people I serve, I said. I believe in finding creative solutions, in building coalitions, in working within the system to achieve meaningful change. But I won't compromise my principles or the village's interests to make bureaucrats comfortable. She leaned back in her chair. You remind me of someone I used to know. Someone idealistic and stubborn who thought they could change the system. She paused. That person was me, 20 years ago. The room held its breath. Comrades, Wu said, addressing the other county officials. I believe we should seriously consider Teacher Lin's candidacy. Yes, she's young. Yes, she's unconventional. But she has vision, she has the support of the village, and most importantly, she has results. Qinghe needs someone who will fight for it. I believe she will. Secretary Chen looked like he wanted to argue, but he was outranked. He glanced at Zhang Kun, who had gone pale, then at the village leaders who were all nodding in agreement. We'll need to verify her party credentials, he said weakly, and there will need to be a probationary period. Of course, I said. I welcome any scrutiny. I have nothing to hide. The vote, when it came, was unanimous among the village leaders and 2-1 among the county officials. Vice Secretary Wu's support had been decisive. At 19 years old, I became the youngest party secretary in the county's history. Zhang Kun stormed out without a word. I didn't care. I had just taken the first major step in my plan. But as I accepted congratulations from Chen Aiguo and the other village leaders, I thought about my family back in the capital. They believed they had gotten rid of me, sent me away to wither in obscurity, while Vivian claimed my achievements. They had no idea what they had actually done. They had set me free. The letter from my grandfather arrived 2 weeks after my appointment as party secretary. He wanted to visit, and he wanted to help. I met him at the county bus station, unsure what to expect. The man who stepped off the bus was tall and dignified, despite his 70 years, with silver hair and eyes that assessed everything they saw. He was well-dressed, but not ostentatiously so, the clothes of someone who had money but didn't need to prove it. He saw me, I was holding a sign with his name, and his face transformed. Tears filled his eyes. Ling Ling, he said, my name barely a whisper. You look just like my wife did at your age. I felt an unexpected surge of emotion. Grandfather. He embraced me and I let myself lean into it for just a moment. The first genuine parental affection I could remember receiving in either life. We went to a small restaurant in town, one of the few places that had private rooms. Over tea and simple food, he told me his story. Your grandmother and I built a successful trading company in Shanghai, he said. We were moderately wealthy, happy. Then she died, and your mother, she was 18, began making demands. She wanted more money, a bigger house, connections to wealthier families. When I couldn't or wouldn't provide what she wanted, she accused me of terrible things, false things. It destroyed my reputation, split our family. He looked down at his tea. I tried to maintain contact with her, with you children when you were born, but she refused, said I was a bad influence, that I would corrupt you with materialistic values. He laughed bitterly. The irony. She, who only cared about status and money, accusing me of materialism. She hasn't changed, I said quietly. If anything, she's worse. I told him everything. Not about the rebirth, that secret I would carry alone, but about the stolen algorithm, the forced volunteering, the years of favoritism toward Vivian, the complete disregard for my dreams and talents. His face grew darker with every revelation. That algorithm, it was your work? Completely. 3 years of research and development. And Vivian presented it as her own? With my parents' help. They gave her my research notes, my codes, everything. He was quiet for a long moment. Then all will say, I have resources, Lingling, money, connections, influence. Tell me how I can help you. This was the moment I had been planning for. Pious, grandfather, I don't want revenge through you. I want to build something they can't take away, can't claim, can't touch. I want to succeed on my own terms, but I do need capital to make my vision for Qinghe Village real. Tell me about this vision. I laid it all out for him, the agricultural reforms, the education programs, the land acquisitions I wanted to make, not for myself, but through the village cooperative, purchasing undervalued plots that I knew would become valuable, the small industries we could develop, the infrastructure improvements. I couldn't tell him about the minerals or the rail line. That would be impossible to explain. But I could tell him about the tea plantation that was being mismanaged, about the hillside perfect for apple orchards, about the small-scale manufacturing possibilities. You want to turn a poor farming village into an economic success story, he said. Yes. Why? Because I can. Because these people deserve better. Because, I paused, searching for the right words. Because my family threw me away. They thought being sent here was a punishment, an ending. I'm going to prove them wrong. I'm going to turn it into a triumph. He smiled, a fierce, proud smile. You are more my granddaughter than your mother's daughter. Yes, I'll fund your vision. But on one condition. What's that? That you never let them make you doubt your worth again. You are brilliant, capable, and strong. The fact that your family couldn't see it is their loss, their failure, not yours. I felt tears prick my eyes for the first time since my rebirth. Thank you, grandfather. No, he said. Thank you for finding me, for giving me a chance to be part of something meaningful. Now tell me exactly how much capital you need to start. We talked for hours. By the time he left to return to Shanghai, I had secured funding for the first phase of my plans, 50,000 yuan, an enormous sum in 1995, especially in rural areas. Enough to buy land, improve irrigation, purchase better seeds and equipment, and establish a small business incubator. But more than the money, I had gained something I had never had in my first life, an ally who believed in me. As I watched his bus pull away, I thought about my mother, who had cut off her own father for not giving her enough. She had traded a relationship with a good man for status and money, and in the end, she had gotten neither. She had trapped herself in a mediocre life, dependent on a daughter who had stolen everything from her other child. The irony was almost poetic. The next 3 years were a blur of activity, success, and transformation. With my grandfather's initial investment and my foreknowledge, I turned Qinghe Village into a showcase of rural development. We reformed the agricultural cooperative, introducing new crop rotation methods and quality controls that increased yields by 40% in the first year alone. We renovated the school and hired 2 additional teachers, making Qinghe's educational program the best in the county. I bought the mismanaged tea plantation through the cooperative for a fraction of what it would be worth in a few years, and brought in experts to restore it. I convinced 3 families to plant apple orchards on that previously useless hillside, providing them with the right tree species and modern techniques. I also quietly began acquiring land. Not for personal profit, everything went through the village cooperative or designated development funds, but in locations I knew would be valuable. The path where the rail line would eventually run, the hillside where the mineral deposit would be found, the plots near what would become the highway interchange. Chen Xiaowen became my right hand, managing many of the day-to-day operations while I focused on planning and external negotiations. We made a formidable team. How do you know all this? She asked me once after I had successfully predicted which crop prices would rise and advised farmers accordingly. How do you know where to invest, what will work, what will fail? Research, I said, which was partially true. And instinct. She accepted that as she accepted most of my decisions. Because they worked. Every prediction I made came true. Every investment paid off. Every risk paid dividends. The county government started to take notice. Vice Equity Secretary Wu, who had supported my appointment, began visiting regularly, always impressed by our progress. Other villages started asking for advice. Articles appeared in county newspapers about the miracle of Qinghe, and through it all, I waited for the two events that would cement my power. The first came in year 4, the discovery of the rare earth minerals. It happened exactly as I remembered in the spring, when a geological survey team came through the region as part of a national resource assessment. They found the deposits in the hills north of the village, millions of tons of rare earth elements essential for modern electronics and renewable energy technology. The discovery would have made Qinghe instantly valuable. It would have attracted mining companies, government attention, and significant revenue. In my first life, under Jiang Kun's corrupt leadership, the village had seen almost none of the benefits. Jiang Kun had made deals with mining companies that enriched him personally while destroying village land and providing minimal compensation. This time, things were different. I had prepared for this moment for 4 years. I had already researched mining regulations, environmental protection laws, and negotiation strategies. More importantly, I had secured legal representation, lawyers my grandfather had connected me with, and I had built relationships with provincial officials who had the power to oversee mining contracts. When the mining companies arrived with their contracts, ready to negotiate with the naive rural village, they found something unexpected: a young woman who understood every clause, who had environmental consultants on retainer, who had provincial backing, and who refused to sign anything that didn't provide fair compensation and environmental protection. "This is unacceptable," the representative from Daiwen Mining Company said, slamming his hand on the table during our third negotiation session. "These terms are far more generous than any rural village has ever received." "Then you're admitting that rural villages are typically exploited," I said calmly. "Qinghe won't be one of them. Sign our terms or leave. There are other mining companies." "You're being unreasonable. I'm being fair. Your company will make millions from this deposit. Qinghe deserves a percentage that reflects the true value of the resource, environmental protections that will preserve our land for future generations, and employment guarantees for village residents." "That's not unreasonable. That's basic ethics." The negotiations went on for months. Other mining companies tried to make deals. I turned them all away unless they met our terms. The county government tried to pressure me to accept lower offers. I refused, armed with legal opinions and provincial support. In the end, we signed a contract that was unprecedented in rural China. A 20-year mining agreement that gave Qinghe 23% of net profits, mandatory environmental restoration, employment guarantees, and funding for village infrastructure. The contract would make Qinghe wealthy, very wealthy, and it would make my position as party secretary unassailable. Year 5 brought the rail line announcement. The government revealed plans for a high-speed rail route connecting the provincial capital with secondary cities, a route that would pass directly through Qinghe County, with a station planned just 3 kilometers from Qinghe Village. The land I had quietly purchased through the cooperative, land that everyone thought was a wasteful investment, suddenly became prime real estate. But I didn't sell it. Instead, I announced plans to develop it into a mixed-use district: commercial space, small manufacturing, a transportation hub, and housing for people who would inevitably be drawn to Qinghe by the mining jobs and new opportunities. "You're thinking too big," one of the county officials warned me. "This is still just a village. You can't turn it into a city." "Watch me," I said. With the mining revenue starting to flow and my grandfather's continued investment, I had the capital to begin serious development. We built roads, installed modern utilities, constructed housing. We attracted small businesses and manufacturers who wanted to be near the rail line. We expanded the school into a full secondary school that students from surrounding villages could attend. Qinghe's population doubled, then tripled. What had been a dying farming village became a boom town, and I was at the center of it all. At 24 years old, I was managing a community of over 3,000 people, negotiating with provincial officials, overseeing multiple development projects, and building something that would last for generations. Meanwhile, in the capital, my sister's career was beginning to unravel. I heard about it through newspaper articles and industry gossip that my grandfather shared with me during his increasingly frequent visits. Vivian had indeed gotten the job at Chentech Industries based on her algorithm. She had been celebrated as a young genius, given a prestigious position, and promoted rapidly. But she had never truly understood the work she had stolen. The algorithm had been just sophisticated enough to seem revolutionary, but it had had limitations that required advanced understanding to overcome. Vivian didn't have that understanding. When Chentech Industries asked her to develop the next iteration, to solve problems and push the technology forward, she couldn't. She had tried to hire people to do it for her, but that only works for so long. Eventually, someone had questioned her explanations, someone had noticed inconsistencies, someone had started investigating. By year 6 of my time in Qinghai, Vivian was facing accusations of academic fraud. Chentech Industries had put her on administrative leave pending an investigation. The algorithm that had launched her career was being traced back to its origins, and people were starting to ask questions about how a young woman with mediocre grades had suddenly produced such advanced work. The scandal hadn't fully broken yet, but it was coming. I read the articles with satisfaction, but without active interference. I didn't need to destroy Vivian. She was destroying herself, exactly as I had known she would. Stolen work, stolen success. It always collapses eventually. My revenge was simply to succeed without her, to thrive in the place she had exiled me to become everything she had tried to prevent me from being. In year 7, Qinghai Village was officially redesignated as Qinghai Town. The population had grown to 7,000. We had a modern school system, a hospital, a business district, and a transportation hub that connected us to the entire region. I was promoted from party secretary to mayor, a position that gave me even more authority and resources. At 26, I was one of the youngest mayors in provincial history. My success had become impossible to ignore. National newspapers ran features on the Qinghai miracle. Universities invited me to speak about rural development. Provincial leaders visited to tour our facilities and learn from our model. And then, finally, my family tried to contact me. The first letter came from my mother. It was full of false warmth and transparent manipulation, asking about my health, mentioning that she had heard about Qinghai's success, suggesting that perhaps we had misunderstood each other all those years ago. She wanted money. That much was obvious from every line. I burned the letter without responding. The second letter came from my father, more direct. He explained that they had supported my decision to go to the countryside and were proud of what I had accomplished. He mentioned that they were having temporary financial difficulties and wondered if I could help them. Temporary difficulties. I knew what that meant. Vivian's scandal had fully broken. She had been fired, blacklisted in the tech industry, and was facing potential legal action for fraud. My parents, who had been living off her earnings, were suddenly broke. I burned that letter too. The third letter came from Vivian herself. No pretense of warmth, no manipulation, just desperate pleading. She admitted to taking the algorithm, though she characterized it as borrowing and claimed she had planned to credit me eventually. She said she was sorry, that she needed help, that she was her sister and family had to stick together. She wanted me to publicly claim that I had given her the algorithm, that it was a collaboration, that there had been no theft. She wanted me to save her career and reputation. I laughed when I read it. Then I burned that letter too. They sent more letters. They called the town office. They even tried to visit once, showing up unannounced at the town administrative building. I refused to see them. "But they're your family," my assistant said, confused by my coldness. "No, Anessa," I said. "They're people who share my blood." That's not the same thing. Chen Xiaowen, who by then knew the full story of how I had been sent to Qinghai, understood completely. "You owe them nothing," she said. "Less than nothing," I agreed. They kept trying for months. Calls, letters, attempted visits. Each one was refused, blocked, or ignored. Finally, my mother tried one last gambit. She contacted a provincial newspaper and gave an interview about her ungrateful daughter who had abandoned her family despite their sacrifices. She painted herself as a victim, a mother who had supported her daughter's idealistic decision to serve the countryside, only to be cut off when that daughter became successful. The article was published on a Tuesday. By Thursday, my grandfather had published a response in a much larger national newspaper detailing exactly what my parents had done: the stolen algorithm, the forced exile, the years of abuse and neglect. He included documentation, including copies of the original transfer papers that showed I hadn't volunteered but had been coerced. He also revealed his identity as my grandfather and explained how his own daughter had cut him off while making false accusations, demonstrating a pattern of behavior. The counter article destroyed what remained of my parents' credibility. Vivian's scandal had already damaged their reputation in their social circles. This finished the job. They never contacted me again. Year 10 brought my greatest triumph. The provincial government launched a new initiative to modernize rural governance and selected Qinghe as the pilot program. As mayor, I was invited to the provincial capital to present our development model to senior officials. I stood in a conference room filled with powerful people, party leaders, government officials, business leaders, and presented a comprehensive analysis of how we had transformed Qinghe. I talked about sustainable development, community engagement, equitable resource distribution, and long-term planning. I showed them the numbers: income levels up 800%, literacy rate at 99%, population growth of 15% annually, business formation rate higher than most cities. I showed them the testimonials: families that had escaped poverty, children who had gone to university and returned to contribute to the town, elderly residents who had seen their community transform from dying to thriving in one generation. I showed them what was possible when leaders actually cared about the people they served. The presentation was met with sustained applause. 3 days later, I received a summons to meet with the provincial governor. "Mayor Lin," he said, "your work in Qinghe is extraordinary. You've created a model that could transform rural China. I want to expand it. I want you to head a new provincial commission on rural development, advising other communities on how to replicate your success." It was an enormous opportunity, a path to even greater influence and power. "I'm honored, Governor," I said, "but I need to decline." He looked surprised. "Decline? This is a significant promotion." "I know, and I'm grateful for the offer, but my work in Qinghe isn't finished. We're at a critical stage of development. I need to see it through. In 5 years, perhaps, when we fully implemented the next phase of our plans, I would be honored to share our experience more broadly. But right now, my place is in Qinghe." He studied me for a long moment. "You care about that town." "It's my home," I said simply. "These people gave me a chance when no one else would. I won't abandon them for career advancement." He smiled. "You remind me why I got into public service in the first place." "Very well, Mayor Lin. Stay in Qinghe, but know that when you're ready, the provincial government will be waiting." I returned to Qinghe with a deeper commitment than ever. This was where I belonged. Not in a provincial capital, not in some bureaucratic office, but here, in the community I had helped build. Year 15 arrived faster than I expected. 15 years since I had been reborn, 15 years since my family had exiled me, 15 years since I had arrived in Qinghe with nothing but a suitcase and a plan for revenge. Qinghe was now a city of 23,000 people. We had a university campus, multiple hospitals, a thriving business sector, and a quality of life that rivaled major cities. The mining revenue had been invested wisely, creating a sovereign wealth fund that would support the city for generations. The agricultural sector had been completely modernized while remaining sustainable. I was 33 years old, still serving as mayor, and consistently rated as one of the most effective local leaders in China. My grandfather, now 85, still visited regularly, proud of everything I had accomplished. "You did it," he told me during his last visit. "You took their weapon and turned it into your throne." "We did it," I corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you." "No," he said firmly, "the money helped, but the vision, the determination, the brilliance, that was all you. Never let anyone convince you otherwise." I thought about my family in the capital. My parents were living in a small apartment, dependent on government pension, having lost everything when Vivian's career collapsed. Vivian herself had never recovered professionally. She worked in a low-level administrative job, her dreams of tech stardom permanently over. None of them had ever set foot in Qinghe. They had never seen what I built, they had never witnessed my triumph, and they never would because I had never invited them. I had never acknowledged their existence. I had built my empire without them, and I would sustain it without them. They had wanted to erase me. Instead, I had erased them. The ultimate revenge wasn't destruction. It was irrelevance. They lived their small, bitter lives in the capital, probably still thinking of me as the daughter they had thrown away. They had no idea that the mayor of Qinghe City, the woman featured in national magazines, the leader praised by provincial governors, was the same girl they had dismissed as expendable. And even if they knew, it didn't matter, because I had moved beyond them so completely that their knowledge or ignorance was irrelevant to my success. The anniversary celebration of Qinghai's redesignation as a city was held in our new civic center, a beautiful building that reflected both traditional architecture and modern design. 5,000 people attended, including representatives from the provincial government, business leaders from across the region, and many of the original villagers who had been here when I first arrived. Chen Aiguo, now retired but still active in community affairs, gave a speech about the transformation he had witnessed. 15 years ago, teacher Lin arrived in our village as an educated youth. We thought she would leave after a year or two, like all the others. Instead, she stayed. She saw potential where we saw only struggle. She brought hope where we felt only resignation. She didn't just change Qinghai, she showed us that we could change ourselves. Chen Xiaowen, now deputy mayor and my closest friend, spoke about the partnerships and innovations that had made our success possible. Then it was my turn. I stood at the podium looking out at the crowd, thousands of people whose lives had been transformed, whose children had opportunities their parents never dreamed of, whose community had become something remarkable. 15 years ago, I said, I came to Qinghai with a single suitcase and no expectations. I had been told this was a backwater, a place without future, a destination for those who had failed or been discarded. What I found instead was a community of hardworking, intelligent, resilient people who simply lacked resources and opportunity. I paused, letting the memory wash over me. I was 19 years old. I had no experience in governance, no connections, no power. But I had something else, belief. Belief that with hard work, strategic planning, and community commitment, we could build something extraordinary. And we did. Not because of me, I was just one person with some ideas. We did it because this community chose to believe in itself. Because farmers became entrepreneurs, because students became scholars, because a village became a town and a town became a city. Today, Qinghai is held up as a model for rural development across China. People come from all over to study what we've accomplished. They ask me what the secret is, how we achieved such rapid and sustainable transformation. I smiled. The secret is simple. We valued people over politics, substance over status, and long-term prosperity over short-term gain. We treated every resident as an asset, not a burden. We invested in education, infrastructure, and opportunity. We refused to accept that rural meant inferior. But more than that, we proved something important. We proved that where you start doesn't determine where you finish, that being overlooked doesn't mean being worthless, that the people and places society dismisses can become the ones it celebrates. The crowd erupted in applause. I let it wash over me, this validation, this triumph. I want to thank every person who contributed to this transformation, I continued when the applause subsided. The farmers who adopted new techniques, the teachers who educated our children, the business owners who took risks, the workers who built our infrastructure, the families who welcomed strangers and made them neighbors. 15 years ago, I was sent to Qinghai because some people thought it would be the end of my story. They were wrong. It was the beginning. Qinghai gave me something far more valuable than the opportunities I left behind. It gave me purpose, community, and the chance to build something that matters. I looked directly at the cameras recording the event, knowing the footage would be shared nationally, knowing there was a chance, however small, that my family might see it. To anyone who has ever been dismissed, discarded, or written off, your story isn't over. The place you're sent, the circumstances you face, the limitations others try to impose, these don't define you. Your choices define you. Your actions define you. Your refusal to accept other people's judgments defines you. Qinghai defined me, and I hope I've helped Qinghai define itself, not as a forgotten village, but as a city of possibility, prosperity, and pride. The applause was thunderous. People were standing, cheering, many with tears in their eyes. I stepped back from the podium, my speech complete, my message delivered. That night, at a smaller gathering with close friends and colleagues, Chen Xiaowen asked me a question that had clearly been on her mind for a while. Do you ever think about your family in the capital? Wonder how they're doing? I considered the question. In my first life, I had thought about them constantly, even when I had tried not to. They had been a wound that never healed, a grief that never ended. In this life, they were just nothing. Shadows from a past that no longer had power over me. No, I said honestly. I don't wonder. I don't care. They made their choices, and I made mine. They chose to prioritize one daughter over another, to steal rather than support, to discard rather than nurture. I chose to build something meaningful with people who valued me. Do you think they know about your success? Probably. My grandfather's counter article was pretty widely circulated, and Qinghei's success has been national news. I shrugged. But it doesn't matter. They have no claim to my accomplishments, no right to share in this victory. They wanted to be rid of me. They are. You're not angry anymore, she observed. No, I agreed. Anger would mean they still mattered. They don't. They're just people I used to know. People who made choices that revealed their character. I've moved on completely. And it was true. The burning rage that had fueled my early years in Qinghai had transformed into something purer. Pride in what I had accomplished, satisfaction in the life I had built, contentment in the knowledge that I had won in every way that mattered. My family had tried to destroy me. Instead, they had freed me. They had sent me to the countryside expecting me to disappear. Instead, I had become impossible to ignore. They had stolen my dreams. I had built better ones. They had erased me from their lives. I had made it so their lives didn't matter to mine. The perfect revenge wasn't making them suffer. It was making them irrelevant. My grandfather died peacefully in his sleep 2 years later, at 87. He left everything to me, his houses, his business interests, his considerable wealth. The fortune that my mother had coveted, that she had destroyed her relationship with her father to pursue, now belonged to the daughter she had thrown away. I used the inheritance to establish the Wang Zhen Foundation for rural development, funding projects across China to replicate Qinghei's success. His name would be associated with transformation and opportunity for generations. My mother sent a lawyer claiming she was entitled to part of the estate. I had my lawyers send back documentation of her false accusations and abandonment. The claim was dismissed. That was the last time I heard from any of them. At 38, I received the provincial government's highest honor for public service. At 40, I was elected to the Provincial People's Congress. At 42, Qinghai City had grown to 40,000 residents and was considered one of the most successful examples of sustainable urban development in China. I never visited the capital. I never sought out my family. I never gave them the satisfaction of acknowledgement. They had sent me to the countryside to get rid of me, to clear the path for their preferred daughter, to erase an inconvenient reminder of their own cruelty. Instead, I had turned that countryside into a jewel. I had become mayor of a thriving city. I had built an empire from the ashes of their rejection, and I had done it without them, without their approval, without their presence. They were nothing to me now, less than nothing. They were simply the people who had made the worst decision of their lives, the people who had thrown away something precious because they couldn't see its value. I was the woman who had proven them wrong in every possible way. I was the daughter they had abandoned who became the leader they could never be. I was the revenge they never saw coming, not because I destroyed them, but because I succeeded so completely without them that their existence became meaningless to my story. They had sent me to the countryside. I had become its queen, and I had never looked back.